So welcome again, everybody. We've got a packed room. We actually was actually told outside we're now something of a fire hazard, so we can add that to the list of things Exchange Server is. So very happy to hear that. My name is Greg Taylor. I'm the Director of Marketing for Exchange Server and Exchange Online.
And I'm Brett Allinger. I'm the individual who ships Exchange Server, product major releases, the cumulative updates, the security updates. So I guess that makes me the man behind the Exchange curtain.
So if you're the man behind the curtain, what am I? I'm the interior designer, therefore, of Exchange. I decide on the color of the drapes, and I hang them up. Brent is the man that hides behind the curtain, therefore. So let's get going. Plenty to talk about this afternoon. So the first thing we should talk about, really, is just to set the scene before we get into the meat of this, which is, let's talk about the state of email today. Because apparently email is dead. Right? Has anyone ever heard that one? An on-prem Exchange is dead. Have you heard that one too? I think the people in the room would, I've got to say, I think the evidence speaks for itself. But let's be honest, right? That the flow of customers moving from on-premises to the cloud is inevitable. It's a change that's been going on for a number of years, and none of us can deny that it exists, obviously. It's a continuing trend, and our cloud service is continuing to grow at an astonishing rate. Adding new data centers, adding new capacity. In fact, capacity planning, it feels like, has become one of the new IT skills that's required, certainly from the Microsoft perspective. You know, how do we build for this capacity that we're seeing customers move? And, you know, but many of us who've been in the world of Exchange for a long time, and I see lots of familiar faces, you know, we still find customers that are on-prem Exchange customers. And many of them are making their transition to the cloud, but there are also a number that are not. And for one reason or another, they've decided to stay where they are, or they're deciding to move forward regardless. So some of these customers, they're not quite ready yet. Maybe there's a bunch of reasons. Maybe they have some objections, technical or political or process-orientated, that is stopping them from moving to the cloud. And I'm going to say this as well. We really want to hear what they are. And we have a team of our engineers from Exchange Engineering that are here and really want to understand what those things are. There's a group of guys down at the front here, in fact, who could wave their arms around. So you want to talk to anyone, you talk to these guys and tell them what your problems are. We're all going to be down at the booth after the session finishes. So make sure you come by and tell us what you think about Exchange and whether it's Exchange Server and what you want to see from Exchange Server, or what it is that's going to take you to move to the cloud. We want to know. Most of those customers, though, that we talk to are large on-premises enterprise customers. And those large enterprise customers tell us really there are a few things that they really want. They want security, they want reliability, they want dependability, they want all of those things that mean Exchange runs as a mission-critical application. And it was funny, I was having a meeting the other day and we talked about Exchange being one of the first applications that really coined the term mission-critical computing, a mission-critical application. And now Exchange is seen as something of a commodity, like power. It has to be there. It has to be there all the time. And so for those customers that still want to stay on premises, that's the reason we built Exchange 2019. And that's also the reason why we're only going to distribute Exchange 2019 to those customers through volume licensing. There's the first one. All right, so volume licensing, because the customers that we think should be staying on premises and moving forward are those large enterprises. You know, another thing I often say is that I would rather have a customer move. If a customer's not ready to go to the cloud just yet, that's fine. It's okay. But let's not leave them behind on premises. Let's keep them moving forward, because if they decide, and when they decide, they eventually want to make a move to the cloud, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier if they're on an up-to-date version of Exchange. So the next question would be then, when do we release it? And we'll go with we're going to release it later this year, right? And we will release it later this year. We have a date in mind, but we're trying to align with some of our other partner teams as well to make sure that we release all of this together. Now, we have changed the way we build things a bit. So,
yeah, thanks, Greg. If you've been in any of our conferences over the past 6 years or read our public guidance, you know that you're probably familiar with the statement that says that the product that we build for Exchange Server is the same product that we run in the Office 365 data centers. And one of the primary benefits that customers derived from that was that they got a rock-solid email server that they had the confidence they knew they could deploy in their two environments. and it was going to meet their needs and then some, because it had been tested and proven in the large-scale data center that we run. But we also received some feedback from customers that the rate of innovation and churn as a result of that decision was a little bit more than you were comfortable with. And keeping up with the continuous stream of updates and new functionality didn't necessarily meet your needs. So here at Ignite 2018, I'm going to announce that with the Exchange Server 2019 release, we are formally separating the Exchange Server product from the O365 version of Exchange. And what we will be doing go forward is we're making the investments in each of those products that best serve the needs of those independent communities. So if you're an Exchange Server on-premises customer, you can expect us to see making investments in features that matter to you, manageability, security. As opposed to if you're in the cloud, you should expect to continue to see that high level of innovation and new delightful features for your end users. We're excited about this change because we think that it positions the product in the best possible way for the possible community, for the community that it's targeting. In terms of what that might look like, on the screen here you can see how historically we've shipped the product. Along that bottom line, in the Office Online service, we've actually, every week we produce a new build of Exchange and we deploy that into Office 365, and it has new features and it has the security fixes, and it's a wholesale replacement of the Exchange server each and every time. But for our on-premises product, even though they were shipped from the same product, what we would do periodically every quarter is we would take a particular build and we would stabilize that and do additional validation that targeted the needs of our on-premises customers. And we would deliver that either through a new product release or through what we refer to as a cumulative update. Now, one of the primary benefits here of taking these cumulative update packages is that it also gave us the opportunity to produce dedicated security updates. We heard from our customers loud and clear that cumulative servicing is not a great way to handle security needs, and you need the ability to take a patch that addresses a particular vulnerability in the product and deploy that quickly in your environment and know that it's only changing the functionality. So that was the purpose of cumulative updates, so we could break this out into security updates. And going forward, we're going to keep with that same cadence, but it's going to look a little bit different. So in terms of the future world, in the service, you can expect the exact same experience. You can expect us to rapidly iterate and churn and produce new features and delightful end-user features. But for our on-premises customers, you can see that we've now established a parallel branch of the code that will be used to deliver those services, those updates and functionality to those customers. Just as we did in previous releases where we had regularly cumulative updates or quarterly updates that would roll out, we plan to do that again with Exchange Server 2019. But if you're looking at that graphic, you're probably saying to yourself, now, it looks like you're going to be producing less fixes for the on-premises product. And the answer is yes and no. What will determine goes into that product are what are the customer needs? What is the feedback we hear from you? What would you like to see in the product? As well as what are the undiscovered events that we have to address. But we do expect there to be a slower cadence, less churn, a more reliable product that you can build your environment on. But it begs the question, do we stick with the quarterly cumulative update? If we're delivering less innovation in each of those releases, does it make sense to keep you on that churn? And for the answer to that for the near future is yes. We intend to start with quarterly cumulative updates. The first one is planned for March of 2019. No big surprise there. We ship them every quarter on a predictable schedule. And so we will start out with those cumulative updates. But I really want to hear your feedback on this. Being on the Exchange Server team, I have the benefit of getting to participate in a Microsoft-wide lifecycle steering committee where we talk about the impacts of decisions that we make on customers. One of the conversations that comes up with regard to Exchange Server is, well, why doesn't Exchange snap to the Windows and the Office semi-annual rate cadence? And the reason is fairly simple. When I participate in the venue of lifecycle, while some customers think that the semi-annual channel makes it easier to consume packages and updates from Microsoft. The reality is we get similar feedback still. It turns out if you align Windows and Office and all the products together, that's almost as challenging for customers to adopt that. So we think that there is a potential sweet spot here, and we think that there is room to change it. I'll be down at the booth all week, be it throughout the halls if you see me. I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think is the right cadence here. But short story is cumulative updates are still going to be a part of Exchange Server 2019, and you should expect a similar servicing story to what we've had today. Now, with every product release, we tend to focus on the new functionality. What are the new features? That's what sells the product. But it's also a time when we can step back and take a look at the existing functionality and determine what are the features that are starting to look a little old or not necessarily meeting the needs of customers. And it's an opportunity for us to remove those from the product. So with Exchange Server 2019, we're saying goodbye to unified messaging. This shouldn't be news here, breaking news here at the conference, because that was announced with the preview release. Now, we do have suitable replacements for that in cloud voicemail and auto attendant. Those are pieces of functionality that's going to be delivered primarily through our integration with Skype for Business server. I'm not going to talk about Skype for Business here, but we do have the engineering team here, and they have a session on Wednesday at 11:30 that I would encourage you to go and hear about their plans. But since we have the Exchange community here, and we're talking about removing Exchange functionality, I would like to talk about what the impact is to the Exchange customer with this decision. And so if you look at what removing unified messaging means, it means first and foremost, your Exchange server is not going to be doing voicemail processing. It's not going to be doing auto attendant processing. So right out of the gate, we get more CPU resources that we can apply back to other functions that are running on the Exchange server. It also means if you're used to that integrated experience of Outlook voicemail integration and OA and ECP, that's not going to be present in the same form in the Exchange Server 2019 release. Now, removing unified messaging doesn't mean that there is no role that Exchange Server 2019 will play with voicemail. It turns out if you deploy cloud voicemail, the service-based function is really only about processing that message, doing the translation, do the transcription, do the recording of it. When it comes time to actually store that message and persist it, it still relies on the Exchange server. So even if you deploy cloud voicemail, that message is going to come back and be deposited in your Exchange server. If you're in the cloud, it'll be deposited in the cloud server. If you're on-prem, it'll be deposited in your on-prem server. And likewise, if you have other third-party voicemail solutions that integrate with Exchange and use EWS or SMTP, those functions will still be available, and the messages will still be deposited in the information store. What will be different, though, is they will simply be an audio file attachment to a message. There won't be any special processing that is done to them. And so they'll look very similar to a Word document, an Excel document, or a PowerPoint document. But the capability to store the message is still there. What it also means is for those customers who want to upgrade to Exchange Server 2019, who have unified messaging, they need to pay special consideration to how they handle that transition. When you take a mailbox that is on a previous version of Exchange that's enabled and you migrate it to Exchange Server 2019, we will remove the attributes from that, and that will no longer be a enabled object. It will be disabled. What that means is in a coexistence environment, if you have Exchange 2016 or 2013 deployed and you're still hosting there, and you think that you're going to be able to migrate your users to Exchange 2019 and leverage that legacy server, you can't, because the server will not see it as a valid object. As part of that migration, however, we will make certain that any existing voice messages that were stored in the user's mailbox will be migrated forward, so there's no loss of data. So effectively what you have are four primary options here are to choose on how you want if you're a unified messaging customer today. First and foremost, your option number one is you can move your users and your mailboxes to Office 365 all up. Voicemail services will be provided in the cloud, and so that is option number one. Option number two, if you want to keep your Exchange on premises, you can deploy Skype for Business Server 2019 and connect it to cloud voicemail. Cloud voicemail processing will occur in the cloud, but then stored in your on-premises server. Now, because both of those are cloud-based solutions, you need to deploy directory synchronization. You need to have Active Directory in sync with the AAD to enable those features. If you're one of those customers, though, who says the cloud is not an option for you yet, and you're looking for a pure on-prem solution, a viable option is for you to stay on Exchange Server 2016. That version of the product will be supported through 2026. And even though we're announcing the discontinuation of unified messaging in 2019, we don't get to walk away from the life cycle associated with our previous product. So if you're using on a previous version of the server, you can do that. If that's not an option for you, obviously there's also the opportunity for you to shift to a third-party voicemail solution. Not our preference, but certainly an option to you. So what would this actually look like if you're a customer who has Exchange in your environment today? Let's start with the scenario where you have integration with Lync and Skype for Business. Typical environment would be that you have Exchange 2013 or 2016 deployed, and you have some version of Lync and Skype for Business, and everybody's happy. Your first order of business is to introduce a Skype for Business 2019 server into your environment. That is the first step that would allow you to migrate those users to cloud voicemail. Once you then complete the migration of all of your users from from the Exchange voicemail mailbox to the cloud voicemail box, you can then proceed to the next step where you introduce Exchange Server 2019 into your environment. And so what you have now is you'll have the situation where Exchange Server 2019 and Skype for Business 2019 and cloud voicemail are all working together as a unified unit on the latest stack available. So not a terrible story, and you still have the ability to have the same functionality that you had before. Let's turn to this scenario, though, where a customer has taken a PBX and connected that directly to Exchange. This is a bit more challenging for us. Now, in order for you to connect a PBX to an Exchange server that's running unified messaging, you need to deploy a device that's called a session border control, or an SBC. It is responsible for taking the PSTN data stream and converting it to a SIP data stream that the Exchange server then can actually process and do intelligent things with. Unfortunately, there's not a great path here. The only option that you have here is to deploy Exchange Server 2019 and go with a third-party voicemail solution. Noticeably absent there is cloud voicemail. If you are a customer who's using PBX today, we've already announced that the discontinuation of support for session border control devices with O365. So for these customers, cloud voicemail is not really an option. And that's what you need to know about the deprecation of
Okay, thanks, Brent.
Sure.
I thought we'd get that one out of the way to begin with, and then we'll move on and talk a bit about what we are adding back into, or what we are adding to Exchange 2019, Exchange Server 2019. So as part of our vision, we really think of Exchange in these three kind of key pillars, really. We think of secure, proven architecture. And if you read the preview blog that we did, we already announced that we're going to support Windows Server Core, and we're going to talk more about that in just a second. And we're going to get into some of the scale improvements that has allowed us to do in conjunction with some of the other technologies that we're adding to the product as well. And our changes to search. So we're going to talk a little bit about search. Now, one of the side effects, really, of our changing to search technology actually has an effect or an impact on failovers. So we're going to talk a little around that as well. Improved calendar management. Calendar is one of the most important things for these large enterprises. The session Thursday morning that Julia Ferran and Jen Liu are doing on calendaring, there's 1,500 people signed up for that session as well in a room, fortunately for them, of 2,700 seats. So I think everyone should be able to get a seat in that one without a problem. But calendaring is another one of those hugely important enterprise features. So we're doing some work in that space. We're going to talk briefly about simplifying connectivity, but primarily point you to another session. So we're trying to kind of make sure you have a guideline of where to go for some additional information rather than put it all in this for you. And then we have some end-user features too. But let's not, I'm not going to beat around the bush too much with this, right? This is not an end-user feature release. We have a version of Exchange if you really want all of the end-user features, and it's called Exchange Online, part of Office 365. That's where all the end-user feature work and benefits go. Let's be honest, right? Exchange Server 2019 is an enterprise messaging platform designed for the world's largest enterprise customers who really want to keep some Exchange servers on premises. So let's dig a little into our secure, proven architecture pillar. And the first thing that we're going to announce here is that Exchange Server 2019 will only run on Windows Server 2019. In the preview, we let you run on Windows Server 2016, primarily because Windows Server 2019 wasn't available, and still isn't. Although I will tell you, and it's being delivered in a session, if it wasn't already mentioned earlier today, it will be in the session at exactly the same time as we're talking now, which is Windows Server 2019 will be available in October. And so we're preferentially, you can only install on Windows Server 2019. And we made a whole bunch of changes to make the product more secure, which only exist in Windows Server 2019 code. And that's the reason why we cannot support Exchange Server 2019 on earlier versions of the operating system. Only the features we need only exist in Windows Server 2019. Here's the next piece. We really want you to run it on Windows Server Core. Windows Server Core is absolutely the best operating system to run Exchange Server 2019. For a number of reasons. Well, one is, it aligns us more closely with the Windows Server team. Great close partners of ours that obviously we're one of the key applications Windows Server has running on their platform. So we work closely with them. We've worked in conjunction with them. Brent has. I'm in marketing. I don't work with the Windows Server team anymore, apart from the marketing guys, right? But there's been a bunch of work done to make it a better combination. So how? In one word, security. Right? It is a more secure platform. And there's a number of reasons, that obviously Windows Server Core is more secure. There are less features by default. We turn off things you don't need. Do you really need a web browser on your Exchange server? Do you really need the fax services on your Exchange server? I don't really think so. Media player, anyone? All of those things in desktop experience are unnecessary on an Exchange server. So let's take them all away. You have less surface area, less probability of attack, therefore, less updates required, less things that could go wrong. And there's also another benefit here or two, of course, as well, which is there are less things running on the box. So if there are less things running on the box, guess who can take advantage of it? We can. So Exchange Server will be more effective because Windows Server is using less of the system resources. We will use those resources in its place. So sure, the disk, you'll use less disk and everything, but think of it primarily as an enormous security benefit. The next logical question is, so what about, hybrid configuration wizard? What about event viewer? What about all of these other things that you're used to running on Exchange Server and on the Exchange Server itself that you now can't? Because, it's not true there is no GUI, right? There is a user interface. But all the MMC-based tools are unavailable to you. Well, I think it's probably a pretty straightforward answer, which is, you run them remotely. You have an administration workstation, which most large enterprises would do anyway. They would actively stop people from trying to log directly onto their Exchange servers and firing up all of the different management tools. You have an admin workstation. Hybrid configuration wizard is a great example. What happens when you run the HCW? It asks, which Exchange server do you want me to remotely connect to with a remote PowerShell? And then Exchange Online through remote PowerShell. You don't need to run it on Exchange. You run it from the admin workstation. So there's absolutely no change in that regard. You need to be running remote tools. Remote PowerShell, all the remote management tools, and it helps us, and we're also working closely with the Windows Server team as well to fit into their future management models as well. So we're closely aligned. Another change that we're making around security is around TLS. So new Exchange Server 2019 installs only use TLS 1.2. We are the most secure we've ever been out of the box. And the legacy ciphers and algorithms, the RC2 and triple DES and a whole bunch of acronyms that you've got there, will be disabled by default. Now, here's a couple of cool lines, right? So we've prioritized a cipher order, prefer elliptic curve key exchange, which I think sounds amazingly clever, doesn't it? Now, I'm not sure who to ask about this. If you're really interested, then you want to find somebody else on the booth and ask. But, Brent and his team have done a ton of work in this space to ensure that Exchange is the most secure out of the box that we've ever been, running on Windows Server Core. And so forwards key secrecy mechanisms, so key compromise, there's a whole bunch of work in that space to prevent, key compromise affecting past session keys as well. So we're as secure as we can be. Now, coexistence is the challenge here, right? That's the thing we really should think about for a second. Now, hopefully, if you've been following the ELO blog, and you'll know we did a series of posts around, the the enablement of TLS 1.2 and the turning off of TLS 1.1. Now, the short version of that is this, that if you've followed the guidance that we've previously published and Exchange Server 2013 and 2016 are up to date, so install the CUs and follow the guidance, they'll be in what we would call transition mode. They will support both TLS 1.1 and 1.2. You then add Exchange Server 2019 into the mix, and it's going to do TLS 1.2, but the two will be able to happily coexist. If you've not followed the guidance in the blogs and Exchange Server 13 and 16 are not ready, you're going to potentially have some server-to-server communication problems. So please don't do that. Follow the blog, follow the guidance. And then once you get to the state where Exchange 2013 and 16 are running in harmony with 2019, you can follow the final stages of the blog, which is disabling TLS 1.1 and moving entirely to a TLS 1.2 environment. So there is a period of transition, but managed carefully and properly, as all good Exchange admins I'm sure that you are will do, then you shouldn't have too many things to worry about. Okay?
Yep.
Great. Back to Brent.
So in addition to partnering with Windows, I spend a lot of my days working with the .NET team. Ever since Exchange 2007, our code base has been predominantly based on the .NET framework. We're about 99% managed code at this point. And so they are a very critical partner to us. And we've worked with them inside of the service as well as in the server product to make the best use of resources. If you follow the landscape of hardware that you typically find in commodity hardware today, we've been confounded by the fact that we seem to be in the cycle of ever-increasing CPU core density. And if our guidance for Exchange 2016 and earlier was don't go above 24 cores. And a lot of that had to do with how we interact with the .NET framework. We've similarly had lower limits for memory. But working with .NET, we've introduced some changes and some optimizations that allow us to more effectively scale on modern hardware with lots of cores and lots of memory. And we've done that through investments in what's called the workstation GC and the server GC and how we deploy those on the product. Some of you in the room undoubtedly have probably been involved in support calls where you were instructed by our fine support engineers in CSS to change app pool configuration and enable server GC, and you're kind of like, I'm doing what? Yeah, just you tell me what to do and I'll do it, fine. Well, in 2019, we've analyzed and made improvements to how that works. And essentially what GC is it's responsible for the allocation and deallocation of memory on the box. And it turns out on an Exchange server, historically we've used what's referred to as workstation GC because when you look at the Exchange workload, it is a finite set of processes that access a consistent data model in a predictable way. And we on the Exchange team are all about value prop and making certain that we give you solutions that are as cost effective as possible. And so for years, we've relied upon workstation GC and we've tweaked it and made that configuration work. But with this increasing density of cores, it's becoming more and more of a challenge. So we've taken some of our workloads and moved them over to server GC now, which is a workload that is typically more suited to like a web server where you have different processes accessing different data models or data sources. But the good news for you is all of this happens underneath the cover. But what it means is that we now can support larger configurations. And we're upping our recommended minimum of memory on the Exchange server to 128 gig. Quite honestly, we've been at 8 gig for far too long. If anybody in the room has a server running on 8 gig of memory and their users are happy, kudos to you. We can't even do that in our own test environments. The typical test machine in the Exchange team has a minimum of 28 gig of memory, and even that is painful. So we think it's time to give Exchange a modern limit. And so recommended minimum for the mailbox server is 128 gig and 64 gig for the edge server. We don't encourage you to go above 256. We don't see any value. The return on investment that you get for adding that memory is just not there. If you look at how we run Exchange and Office 365, none of our servers have more than 256 gig of RAM. So we're very comfortable with this configuration and this option, and we think you'll have a great experience moving forward. The next big architectural change that we've introduced into, and I'll pause for reaction here, is a new search. There's the reaction I was making. Boo, not a clap. Like, because Brent, what are you saying? You re-architect search with every single Exchange release. That's true, we do. But the reason we do is because when you look at the functionality that is most impactful to users and admins on their day-to-day basis, it's probably search. Whether you're executing an e-discovery result or it's somebody who's trying to to find a particular email in their inbox, search is an absolute critical component of Exchange. And quite honestly, the search engine that we have right now we're starting to push it beyond its limits. So what we've done is we've partnered with our friends in Bing and taken Bing technology, incorporated it into the information store in a feature that we're calling Big Funnel. And the nice thing about this is it's a much simpler system. It's a more performant system. If you look at the Exchange server prior to Exchange Server 2019, the search engine would produce a large set of files in the file system, and it was predominantly based out of the file system. And those indexes were used to span across multiple databases and multiple mailboxes, and it was not too uncommon that you would try to go and fail over your DAG and activate a copy of a database on another server, and it would fail because, lo and behold, the index is unhealthy. And you're like, what am I supposed to do with an unhealthy index? It also caused us to go through some inefficient machinations where we would have to introduce things like indexing on passive and make certain that the copies of that index were healthy on all the copies of the databases and all the servers. Well, enter Big Funnel, where all of that goes away. We've actually moved the content index into the information store. And not only have we moved it into the information store, we've actually created indexes for each individual mailbox. So now, rather than having this large set of indexes that apply to multiple users and multiple databases, each individual mailbox has its own search index that will be used. And what we end up getting is a more scalable, more performant search that is also actually much easier to manage. Because it's incorporated into the mailbox itself, it's already a part of that normal process of log file replication and replay across the nodes. And when it comes time to actually activate a copy on a different server for maintenance or for a planned failover event, the index is already in that mailbox. It's already active. It's already up to date. And what you're going to find is you're going to see fewer and fewer failures of activation of copies on remote servers. So while, yes, it is a repeat story that we brought back here for a new release of the server, we believe that it's a super important one. And I encourage you to, if you want to know more about the details of how it actually works, Damon Gilkerson and Tobias Klima will be having a session tomorrow at Wednesday at 4:30 that will be highly informative and talk about the actual innards of the new search engine.
That's right. And so it wasn't just the change in search technology that caused us to come across the realization that we'd reached the limit of cheap storage. And so, for years, Exchange has been, since the days of the SAN back in Exchange 2003, we've been preaching this idea of let's go to cheap, low-cost storage and maximize the IOs from cheap, low-cost storage. But we reached the limit as far as we're concerned, because the problem was that cheap, low-cost storage keeps getting bigger, and mailboxes and data keep getting bigger, but the latencies weren't coming down. So the read latency for getting the data back wasn't getting better in line with the capacity. So the realization was we needed to figure out a way to get the hot data, and it's not all of the data, right? The vast majority of Exchange data that really impacts the user experience is things like logon and opening of folders and things like search results. So the question was, how could we engineer Exchange in such a way that we could get access to that data so much faster than we can with cheap, low-cost storage, and give a better user experience? We don't have to put it all there. We want to keep the cost down. The whole TCO piece comes into play. So essentially, we built Exchange to use tiered storage. And this was something we mentioned on the blog when we announced the preview back earlier this year. And so we now use both a combination, you can use a combination of flash-based storage, SSDs, and also traditional low-cost storage as well. So, Ben, you want to explain how that might work?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we're super excited about this feature. This is something that has come straight from O365. And effectively what you have here is we've built the intelligence into the information store process to handle a bifurcated response for each and every request. So on the left side of the screen, you can imagine an Outlook client or some other email client that's submitting a request to pull a page out of the database on the Exchange Information Store. And what the store is going to do is it's going to take that and it's going to simultaneously forward that request to the traditional JBOD disk storage system. But if you have the feature that we're calling Metacache Database, which is just a fancy name for SSDs, enabled, it will simultaneously submit that request to the SSD. And whichever request is serviced first is what will be used to transfer the data back to the client. Now, we anticipate, and our actual findings running this in the service are that because flash memory is so much faster than the actual JBOD, the majority of your requests are going to be serviced out of that device. And so the primary benefit is a really fast response. But as Greg mentioned, not all of the data is up there. So not all of your requests are going to be serviced from the flash. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, but wait a minute, flash has a limited use lifecycle. And that's true, it does. And so one of the things that we've made certain that we built into this product is it is a highly available and highly resilient solution, even though we're relying on a product that has, in many instances, questionable reliability as it ages. So in the event that the SSD were to go away, all of the rules that you've become familiar with and the functioning of the Exchange server continues seamlessly. And so if the SSD fails, we'll actually continue to service those requests from the JBOD disk as if nothing ever happened, as if the SSD wasn't there. Now, there's also some optimizations that we do in the event of the SSD failure. If we have another suitable target on another server where the MCDB is healthy, we could actually initiate a failover event so that you continue to have that super fast response out of the Exchange server, but it's not actually required. But you're probably asking yourself, so how do I plan? And what are the storage requirements for SSDs or Metacache database? And when we start talking about MCDB, number 3 is a very important number for you, and I'll ask you to remember that. First of all, when you start planning to deploy Metacache database, you need to worry about the number of devices. That's number 1. Number 2, you need to worry about the types of devices that you're going to deploy, because there are multiple types of SSD available on the marketplace today. And 3, you need to think about the capacity. How much SSD should I actually put onto my server? So let's walk through those one by one. In the case of the number of devices, our experience using this over the last year has shown us that the sweet spot for cost benefit, again, being totally cognizant of TCO, is if you allocate, for every 3 spindles of disk that you have, if you allocate 1 SSD device, that provides the optimal availability story. So 3 spindles of disk and 1 SSD device. The second factor that we talked about was what type. And here again, there are 3 major types of SSDs that are available on the market today. First is the read-intensive, which are the cheapest, the most highly available, typically what you find in your laptop or your tablet device. Great for that type of reality, but not well suited to a highly write-dependent workload, which is what Exchange Server is. We don't recommend that you use read in an Exchange server because the burnout rate is very high. Second option is you could go for what's called a write-intensive SSD, which is optimized for lots and lots of sustained I/O, and that is of a write nature. The downside there is that those tend to be very, very expensive. So if you're cost sensitive, you don't want to go with a write-sensitive deal. If you don't mind breaking the budget, and money's no option, go right ahead. Exchange server will run just fine. It'll be happy with it. Your CIO might, or your accounting may not be happy with you, but that's a challenge you'll have a conversation you'll have to have with them. The third option is to go with what's called a mixed-use SSD, where you have a balance between read and write and a balanced price. And this is where we think you should be deploying SSDs for Metacache database. So just like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where you had the porridge that was too cold, the porridge that was too hot, and the porridge that was just right, we think that the mixed-use SSD is the porridge that's just right that you can stick into your Exchange server. Now, the third factor that I talked about was how do you determine how much capacity of SSD to put on the box? And this really starts with the conversation of your underlying disk system design. Now, if you're going to deploy Metacache database, the first rule is you design the server to meet your I/O requirements out of your disk subsystem. Just like you've done for every previous release of Exchange, you need to make certain that you analyze your user profile, that you have the right I/Os, you have the right capacity, and you have the right number of devices in the machine. None of that changes. But when it comes time to take and put the MCDB or the SSD devices in there, you now take the total amount of storage that you've allocated to disk and allocate a percentage of that in addition, not as replacement, to the spinning spindles. So again, the optimal amount that we see here is in the 5 to 6% range. So you can deploy more than that, but it turns out that MCDB performance doesn't scale linearly. So putting more SSD is not going to give you better performance. You're just going to be wasting more money. So what this might look like in actual server implementation is if you take a typical large Exchange server where you have, say, 15 10 terabyte disks, which with a total of 150 terabytes of storage, the numbers that you're looking at here are 15 drives. So using the 3:1 ratio, I need to add 5 SSD devices to that configuration. 150 terabytes of storage, 5 to 6% puts me somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 terabytes. So what I end up needing to do is put in 5 2-terabyte SSDs, and I have the optimal configuration for Exchange Server. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what are we going to put on that SSD? That's a good question. First and foremost, we're going to put what we think needs to be there. We don't give you the option to decide what goes on there. That's all handled automatically by the information store. The primary data sets that you're going to find there are the index data that supports search. You're going to find the mailbox data structures, the mailbox folder table, those hot paths that are accessed very, very frequently in the information store. That's what's going to be housed in your SSD. And then third, the most likely candidate for propagation into the SSD are small messages. If you have messages that can fit within a single page of the database, turns out those are very good candidates to populate into the SSD. Types of things that you won't see in the SSD, attachments. There's very little benefit to taking attachments to messages and pushing them there. They just end up wasting space and they're not used very frequently. So you won't see those types of things. What is the net benefit that you're going to get here? You're going to get super fast logon. You're going to get super fast search. And you're going to have a great experience, especially if you think about non-cache mode clients. If you're running Outlook with virtual desktop infrastructure, you know that one of the challenges you have today is that you have to use online mode with Outlook. Couple that with MCDB, and your end users are going to have a great experience because they're going to get fast logon, they're going to get fast search, and they're going to get fast message retrieval. But that doesn't mean that our traditional cached mode Outlook clients don't benefit as well. It turns out that in Outlook 2019, by default, we preferentially will attempt to pull the search results from the server as opposed to having the Outlook client look locally. And so even in this instance, the cache mode Outlook 2019 client is going to benefit from MCDB. But rest assured, everything that you know about Exchange and have come to expect over the years is still present, and the JBOD system is just as reliable as it was in previous versions. If something can't be satisfied by the SSD, it's going to be satisfied by the JBOD.
Goldilocks and the Three Bears, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a good one. Right, okay, so now MCDB is completely built into the Exchange AHA story, right? So log replay knows exactly what data should be written to the SSD versus, everything's written, in completion to the slower drive, but part of it is written to the SSD, and the Exchange HA engine takes care of all of that for you. So there's really very little, apart from the sizing that Brent mentioned, that really you have to do to take advantage of this. But the key thing is that all of these servers are the same. All the servers need to have an identical layout. If you're going to have MCDB, then you plan for it as part of the initial deployment. We provide scripts, commandlets when we ship that will allow you to configure it. But MCDB is not something you add to the DAG once you've architected it and built it. That's definitely not the way to do it. So the session on Wednesday afternoon, Damon and Tobias are doing a session where they're going to talk about both the MCDB and the search technology changes, and that is most definitely a session you do want to see. And that team are the current owners, well, the always owners of Squeaky Lobster, as it happens, if you happen to know who that particular individual is. So, moving on to another pillar around performance and manageability. So the next thing that we've done, and you might wonder, like, is this really a feature? I mean, I don't know what it is, but we're going to explain what we've done. So one of the things that we did was Brent and the team took a sharp knife to all of the additional files that were no longer necessary on the DVD. And can you see how that DVD is shrinking? They cut out a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need. Now think about it. We took out so there's one great thing that came out, and there was a whole bunch of stuff associated with that. But, you know, the real benefit of doing this is not that it installs faster or you can download it from us a bit faster necessarily. That's not really the main thing. The main thing is, again, it comes back to the one word that large enterprises really care about, which is security. There are less files on the boxes. There are less, there's less opportunities for something to go wrong and need patching. So we made the decision to try and cut out as much as we could from the product to try and streamline as much as we could. But one thing, there's no more language packs to reinstall and reinstall and reinstall. Anybody ever been in that one before? So hopefully you'll be happy about that. So Brent, is that a fair representation? How much we're going to shrink it? About that? About that? Yeah, it's about 20%. Yeah, that's right. There you go. All right. So about 20% smaller. But we're trying to save you some files. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about around the area of performance and manageability is we've changed a very historical way that Exchange use database cache. So historically, Exchange would allocate cache memory for all of the copies of a database on the server, whether they were active or whether they were passive. We would figure out how many databases are on the server, and we would allocate cache across them all equally. And that's something we've done since the early days of Exchange and database engines. Now, the problem is that these passive databases don't need cache in the same way. And cache is what's, going to cache to retrieve what the user's after is much faster than going to disk. So we were allocating cache in a kind of entirely equal way. So what we've now done is we've introduced this thing we're calling dynamic database cache, where we now dynamically adjust the amount of cache memory that is given to database copies that are active on a server, so that active copies have more cache available than passive copies. It seems pretty damn logical, doesn't it? And you think, well, it's surprising you didn't do this years ago, Exchange team. Well, it's probably a bit surprisingly harder than you might think to do. But we've done the work now, and so essentially it goes back to what is it? The benefit is active database copies have more database cache. More database cache means we go to the disk less. Overall net effect is improved performance from the user experience perspective. Then if we can grab something out of cache rather than have to go to disk for it, we will, and that will be fast. And if you have MCDB, if it's not in the cache and we can grab it from the SSD, that will be fast. If you have to go to the slow spinning disk, it won't be as fast, right? So it's simply an optimization. So visually, hopefully I explained it well enough, but this should give you an idea. So in the olden days, before Exchange Server 2019, database or cache, by the blue lines here, equally allocated. System memory over on the right-hand side gives an idea of, the performance, the system memory available on that machine. And in Exchange Server 2019, we up the amount of cache for active copies, essentially, and then whatever's left is divided amongst the passive copies. Actually, it's a lot more complicated than this. I've rather simplified it in this diagram, but you might want to go to the session on Wednesday if you're really into this kind of stuff. Next question then is what happens if another database copy becomes active? Of course, the system will dynamically adjust the cache memory so that we share the most memory with the active copies and we reduce the passive copies. But here's the important thing on the right-hand side, of course, which is the overall effect on the system is unchanged. There is nothing else you need to do. System, you don't need to redesign or architect in any different kind of way. Overall effect on the system with this is unchanged, but better user experience. So the real question is, with all the MCDB stuff that Brent was talking about on the dynamic database cache that I mentioned, the big question is, so what? What effect is it really going to have? So what effect will it really have, Brent?
Well, it's pretty significant. Based upon our usage of these features, we're estimating that you can put about 20% more users on an Exchange server using comparable disk configuration than you could on 2016. It also means, and this is the more important feature, is that we're future-proofing the product for you. We know that you're deploying Exchange Server 2019 today, and it's going to be in your environment for the foreseeable future. And through our conversations with OEMs and hardware vendors, we also know that larger disks are also on the horizon. 20 terabyte disks are expected to be widely available within the next couple of years. And unfortunately, although we're increasing the density, multi-actuator disks, which would allow us to improve the performance of the disk subsystem itself, are even further off. Being worked on, but not in the near future. So we've engineered the capability for Exchange to grow as the ecosystem continues to grow. But it also means that for those customers that are dependent on interaction with the server, you're going to see at least a 50% improvement or reduction in latency of those transactions between the client and the server. And so you're going to see a much better responsiveness, especially, as I mentioned, for those online node VDI clients.
Is that good? We like that? Come on, all right.
I guess I have to work harder.
I think you're going to have to work harder. We should have given them more ice cream. All right, so moving on again. We've still got a few things to get through. So customers doing layer 4 load balancing. So we talked about this a couple of versions back. We got away from this need to do layer 7 load balancing and moved into a layer 4 model of load balancing. Well, that was generally all good, but there was one problem that we had with layer 4 load balancing. And in a layer 4 load balancer, you don't have any visibility to the endpoint that a client is trying to reach, meaning the WAC OA, WAC RPC, WAC OAB, whatever it might be. At layer 4, you just see a TCP connection. And so one of the challenges when a customer would publish Exchange using a layer 4 load balancer is they would also be publishing their PowerShell endpoint and their Exchange Admin Center endpoint and a bunch of other things. So one of the things that we've added to Exchange Server 2019 is the client access rules feature, which you've seen in Exchange Online, a feature that we previously shipped to Exchange Online. But with Exchange On-Prem, we've done it really for just two endpoints, the PowerShell endpoint and the Admin Center endpoint. But I'm going to highlight that there is one caveat to this, all right? So we wanted to do the work, and this is work we are continuing to do. We'd like to still improve the situation. So this is how this works. So if you want to restrict, you create a client access rule which determines who can access this endpoint based on IP address or user. And then the rules are evaluated as whether access is granted. Now for the admin center, the rules are evaluated on an Exchange Server 2019 box. So if the Exchange admin's mailbox is on 2019 and you create a rule that says you can't access the admin center from this range of IP addresses, for example, that gets evaluated just fine, no matter how the connection comes in. But I'm going to tell you that PowerShell evaluates slightly differently. So PowerShell when a PowerShell connection is made to a front-end virtual directory, it's immediately proxied to the back-end virtual directory on the same box. Now what that means is, if the back end of that box is, if that server is an Exchange Server 2019 box, great, no problem. We can evaluate and apply the client access rule. But what if you're in a multi-version coexistence scenario? You've added Exchange Server 2019 to a 13 or 16 org, because that cross-version compatibility we introduced years ago still exists, and you can add 2019 server to an existing org. But unfortunately, PowerShell client access rules won't apply if the connection comes through 13 or 16. So I'm just pointing that out as a front-end connections need to land on Exchange Server 2019 if you want to be able to use a client access rule to control access to PowerShell. So not hiding the fact, there's some capability there. It's obviously better once you get a full 2019 org. Okay, so there's that one. Brent.
Yeah, so another thing that we've heard from customers in addition to the need for client access rules is that managing calendars can be a pain. And it turns out that calendars are one of the most important functions of data that customers rely upon. And we've really kind of hamstrung the admin to be able to respond to any kind of activity where an update to the calendar is required. So in 2019, we've introduced a feature called the Remove Calendar Events, which allows the admin to go in and modify calendars and clean them up. And Greg, as you know, it's... Okay. Well...
Yeah. I wasn't expecting that one.
I wasn't expecting that one, and maybe they'll like what I was going to say next even more.
Okay.
Is that it's hard to find compelling demos for the audience here, and with Ignite going on this week, I know your calendar is chock full of events, and so I entertained the notion of doing a live demo of Remove Calendar Events because I thought it would be exciting. To see everybody have me go in and delete all of your calendar events for the rest of the week.
Thank you.
But sanity set in, and I realized that we would eventually get back to Redmond, and I'd want to be able to work with you.
Yeah,
so
thank
we
you.
didn't do that.
Appreciate that.
So I opted for just the low impact demo here of showing how you use the command. It's really straightforward. Basically, you tell the calendar object that you want to modify the date range, when you want the window to start, and it's pretty flexible. So we hope you'll like the feature.
Okay.
Now, another area that we've heard is a pain point with customers is hybrid connectivity. While it is absolutely critical for us, and we view it as the future, I'm happy to announce that at the conference this week, we are going to disclose some of the really, really cool work we've done to make hybrid simpler. But under penalty of death, I've agreed with Jeff Kisner that I will not disclose any of those here, and instead I will redirect you to his session. So if you want to understand what we're doing to make hybrid connectivity simpler, please go see Jeff Kisner's session at 10:45 on Wednesday.
Thank you. And we've named it properly this year because we did get the feedback that Jeff's session last year was packed full of great information, but his title was terrible. So yeah, right, there you go, right. We've actually named it well this year, so if you can't find it, then there's not much else we can do. All right, so the final of the three pillars we're going to get into is our end-user work, right? And as we highlighted up front, we were focusing far more on large enterprises and back-end stuff, but we have a smattering of end-user features too. One of the things that's already existing in the Outlook clients is just a simple thing, which is setting a default end date for recurring meetings. So rather than leave them to run infinitely, they'll have an end date at some point, which is great. Okay, so there's one thing. Now the next thing, oh great, go for it. Yeah. They love calendar, you see.
I know, we should do more work in this.
Right. Do not forward. So here's a feature that you may already be aware of from the Exchange Online side, but giving organizers of meetings the ability to prevent forwarding of a meeting that they create. Who doesn't just, hate that when you try and set up what you think is a small, tight meeting to discuss something and everyone gets forwarded and 47 people show up in a meeting room? We've all had it, right? So now what's interesting about this is it's actually implemented in transport. It's enforced in transport. The flag is set in the client. Now I'm going to tell you that at this moment in time, OWA is what we're shipping with. So if meetings are created in OWA, you can set the do not forward flag. Now, other clients in on-prem, it's a different story for online than it is for on-prem. And I suggest you go see Julia and Jen's session on Thursday morning to really talk to the calendar experts about where this is coming to different clients. But even if you create a meeting in the OWA client, you set do not forward. Even though the Outlook for Windows or Outlook for Mac client connected to an on-premises mailbox is not going to show you, or you're not going to observe the fact that the meeting has been set in do not forward, it's actually setting a property on the message which is respected in transport. Now the transport in Exchange 2016 respects this flag as well as 2019, not 2013. We haven't gone that far back in time. Exchange 2013 can barely remember. They were the halcyon days, right? And so what it means is that Exchange Transport will enforce the do not forward, even though the client, Outlook for Windows, for example, against on-premises currently, doesn't really understand what it is or what to do. So even if an Outlook for Windows client modifies the meeting, it doesn't change the property on the meeting that means transport will block it. All right, so for the time being, that's an OA feature. And I'll show you what that looks like, really. So on the right-hand side here, you can see that one of the meeting options that's available is to, the lower one here is to allow forwarding. So the organizer simply removes the check from allow forwarding. If your eyes are a little blind, you know, like mine, I've started wearing glasses, I'm getting really old. That's where it is, where the big blue arrow is. Now, the experience for the user accepting or receiving this invitation is they get this gray banner at the top of the message if they're in an OA client, okay? Bear in mind, we do a lot of work in the OA client first, particularly in the calendar space. It's much easier to implement and faster to iterate on it at the moment as well. And so we have this warning up at the top. And so if this user were to try and forward this meeting from within OA, then in OA, the option to forward is grayed out for them. It's not grayed out for Windows, like I said, for Outlook for Windows or Outlook for Mac, but it doesn't mean that Transport will let the message go through. The user would get an NDR saying you can't send that message or forward that meeting. Okay? So that's our do not forward. Another key feature, calendaring related, that we've added into Exchange Server 2019 is the better out of office. So additional options that allow you to be, it's a smarter option. I'll just simply show you what we can do. There's a few things, and again, this is OA right now only. Setting your
the best client
in OA. Sorry?
The best client.
The best client. Yeah, it's really funny. Brent uses OA every day. He's like an OA on-prem kind of guy. That's his client of choice.
It is.
And he's very happy with that, and I'm very happy for him. Better roof. Yeah. So when you try and set up a meeting, you get this, you know, we all know and love this dialog box, right? But when you check the radio button for, to set a particular time range, we give you these additional new checkboxes. So you can say, I'm blocking my calendar for a particular event, and then you have an additional checkbox to allow you to decline meetings that come during that time. And then the third option you can actually get as well is to say that, you know, I would like you to clear my calendar for this time that I am oof. So if I decided to set this, I wouldn't be at Squeaky's party on Wednesday afternoon, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Okay, so we've added these better oof options to the OA client that you connect with Exchange Server 2019. Now, another piece that we're including in this group as well is email address internationalization. So support for these standards for the non-English characters and email addresses. But we've got to make sure you're super clear here. If you're not sure what that is, there's a list at the bottom. Now, actually, with kindness, borrowed this list from Jeff Guillet, ex-PTA. He had a great list of ones down here. Now, I actually have no idea if these are real email addresses. He could have all kinds of terrible. He had this on his website. But these are the kind of examples of internationalized email addresses. Now, Exchange will give you the capability to send to and receive from users, other recipients, with EAI addresses. You cannot yet add an EAI domain or address policy as an accepted domain and apply it onto your mailbox. Okay, so that's something that we're working on, and we're working with O365, who have a much larger challenge with all of the other workloads to support this capability. So within Exchange now, what we're saying is you can send and receive from these particular people with those particular kind of email addresses. That's in Exchange Server 2019 as well.
Without resorting to Punicode tricks and all of that.
Without resorting to Punicode tricks, indeed. Yeah. All right, so let's run down quickly the system requirements.
Sure. So we've already talked about Windows Server 2019, Server Core. I really encourage you to explore Server Core. Out of all the things we've done in Exchange Server 2019, Server Core for me is personally the most exciting. With 2019, we're upping our requirements for .NET to .NET 4.7.2. Thankfully, Windows Server 2019 already has it installed for you, so there's no effort required. A little bit of a sneak peek of what's coming in a future cumulative update. Can you expect 4.7.2 release for our in-market versions of Exchange Server? Yes, you can. Stay tuned to the EDO blog for that. In terms of interacting with Active Directory, we're going to require Force functional level of 2012 R2 or later. Keeping with that strong security story, we want to make certain that you're deploying the OS that's going to be most secure for your environment, and that includes the Active Directory as well. We've talked a lot about solid state for MCDB, so not a lot to say there. We've talked about the memory requirements. When it comes to coexisting with previous versions of Exchange or Outlook, no change there to our story that we've delivered in the past. We typically support an N-2 version, so Outlook 2013, Exchange 2013, you're all good. They work seamlessly with Exchange Server 2019. Anything before that, you have to do an intermediate step of a migration to 2013 or 2016 before you can introduce 2019. While we were sitting here in the room, if all went as planned, the Exchange Server 2019 docs are now live on docs.microsoft.com. You can now go out and read all about what's new and what's improved in Exchange Server, as well as start to read deployment guidance. And it is on docs.microsoft.com, not TechNet. We have made the transition. And with respect to calculator and preferred architecture, you can expect to see updates to those tools later this year. Preferred architecture is basically done. We're still working through some of the mechanics of the calculator, but we will be providing updates for those.
Okay, we're not done yet. Don't disappear. All right, so futures. So we're going to give you an insight into some of the things that are planned on coming as well. So and we're going to run through this list fairly quickly. Now, one of the things on the top of this list here is close to my own heart. And if you were at Ignite last year, you may have come to a session where I said, on-premises modern auth we were going to put in Exchange Server 2019. Did you see it earlier in the slide deck? Yeah, no. So
Don't point at me.
No, actually, yeah. And it's actually
I want it
not
too.
Brent. It's actually not Brent at all. Strictly speaking, Exchange Server supports it. The challenges are more in the client library, the ADAL library, and Office integration piece. So from an Exchange Server perspective, and I'm not trying to blame our friends, right? But from an Exchange Server perspective, we consume OAuth tokens, whether it's from Azure or from wherever it is. We're kind of good with that. We really want to have that story come to fruition, though, so we're still working hard on that. Another thing on here as well, client access rules. We're looking to extend what we already showed you today and see what else we can do in the client access rule space. And then, Brent, you wanted to comment on a couple of those?
Sure. So if you're familiar with the bring your own key feature, where you can provide your own key to encrypt database content, mailbox content in the O365 service, not in the RTM version, but in a future CU, you can expect us to bring the on-premise analogous version that we're calling host your own key, where you can now encrypt the contents of the mailbox database, the mailboxes in the mailbox database with the key of your choosing, and provide a higher level of encryption of protection to your data. We're also looking at improving our monitoring and analytics tools. We didn't talk about that much in this conversation today. SCOM is currently the best monitoring solution we have. I use best in air quotes because we recognize that the time has come for us to move to something modern. And so we are actively right now working with the engineering team to scope out what investments we would be making there. We're also hearing increasingly from customers the need to block legacy authentication mechanisms. It's finally time to turn off NTLM and basic auth and move to something that's a little bit stronger. So those are things that you can look for us to be making investments and announcements about. You want us to talk about RPC or HTTP?
No. Certainly. So a bit of a heads up. RPC HTTP. We're not announcing the death yet of RPC HTTP, but I can tell you it's looking pretty ropey right now from where we are. So it's just really a bit of a heads up. We'd like our customers to move to MAPI HTTP. We've had that available in the last 2 versions of the product, and there's that's where all the investment and feature work are going. The RPC HTTP code is legacy Windows code. They own the RPC code essentially. So I don't think the Windows team really like to talk to you when you have RPC HTTP problems anymore.
No, it's a call that goes unanswered.
Right. So strong suggestion, and this seemed like a good audience and opportunity to do it as any. If you're still using Outlook Anywhere, RPC HTTP, you might want to think again. Okay? So heads up. And the last thing I just wanted to highlight on the slide as well, which was something we announced in the preview blog post. If you saw the blog post on ELO, which was most noticeable for me because there was an image at the top with a couple of users dancing. Did you see that image? Anyone who read that blog post? I just threw it in as a placeholder, thinking for sure my boss or somebody was going to say, like, you can't use that picture, but she didn't. So I kept going with it. So now we have a picture of a couple of users dancing. They're joyful. That's how I like to think of them. Right.
Exchange makes me joyful.
But we did announce Simplify Calendar Sharing. in that preview post. Now, unfortunately, we have not talked about it today because it's kind of a complicated problem to solve, and we're still working through that. We still have ambitions and hopes to deliver that in a future CU, but right now we can't announce it for RTM. So we're sorry about that if that was one of the key things you were after, but tell the people down on the booth after the session here all about the things you really want from Exchange Server. Tell them what you love about it, what you don't love so much, and tell them what's stopping you from going to the cloud. And they would love to get your feedback as well. There is some more to come. So, but that's our presentation on Exchange Server 2019. So, we really built Exchange to meet the security, performance, and technology demands of the largest on-premises enterprise customers. That was the goal. That's the focus of the engineering, and we hope what we've shown you in terms of the security and the performance and manageability benefits will deliver on that for those customers. But I'm going to give you a few other things before I can see a few people disappearing, but just give me 2 more minutes. I'm going to show you a couple of things that are interesting. So one is a list of other sessions that we've got going on at Ignite. This is a day 1 session. Thank you for picking our day 1 session. I know there's a lot of competition to see which one of these you want to go to. But there's plenty of other sessions you can get to. I cannot possibly read any of these because my eyes aren't nearly as sharp as they used to be. But we've got sessions on calendaring and storage, and you definitely want to see Kisner's session on Wednesday and Julia's calendar session on Thursday if we haven't already highlighted those. But we also have a bunch of sessions and Outlook in our track as well. So deep dives into Outlook for Windows and Mac, what's going on in Outlook on the web, a whole deep dive there, and a ton around Outlook Mobile, security, hear from customers how they're using Outlook Mobile in their enterprises too. So please do take a look at the rest of the sessions in the track. If you want to drop down by the booth, we've got a single sheet of paper with all of the Exchange and Outlook sessions and where they appear, and theatres as well. We've got a ton of great theatres as well going on this week. And that will give you a good idea of what we've got going on this week. Now, these guys are leaving a bit too early because the other thing that we've got going on this week as well, they really are. They're not going to get one of these. So, we've partnered with Tony Redmond, one of the authors of the Office 365 for IT Pros book. Tony and his team have they write this terrific book. Hopefully you already know of this book. Now, what we're doing this year is we've bought 500 copies of Tony's book, right? Oh, Tony and team's book, sorry, right? Of the book. And we're going to give it away, give 50 copies away during 10 of our sessions this week. Now, you'll see a slide like this at the end of 10 of our sessions, okay? And there's going to be a URL at the bottom that you will need to try and get to as fast as you can. The first 50 people who go to the URL at the end of that session can get themselves a free copy of this book, which is normally, I don't know, $40, $50 and 1,000 pages. You could put it on, you could reach high shelves if you stand on that book, if you printed it out. It's a big, thick book with a ton of info. So make sure you stay to the end of our sessions. There's a good way to keep you from staying. And I would also suggest you follow us on Twitter. You can follow me. I might give out some hints on Twitter, GregTaylor_MSFT. You might also want to follow the Squeaky Lobster and the Exchange handle. We might give some clues as to which sessions these will appear in. Bear in mind, only the first 50 people will get it. If you don't get it the first time, go to more sessions. It's like a game. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Now, speaking of Squeaky Lobster, hopefully you may have seen this. And I'm going to introduce you to somebody. This is, you may have, hands up who's heard of Squeaky Lobster. Hands up who has no idea who we're talking about. Great. You just quiet down for a second, you lot, right? Because I'm going to show you. This is the original. I have the original, the real Squeaky Lobster here. I mean, I'm not one of them fake news Squeaky Lobsters that you see all over the place, right? That was at Mac. It's probably a little smaller than you were thinking, but this is the real Squeaky Lobster that was with the ESE team only last week. I persuaded the dev that started the story, Andrew Goodsell, and the friends in his office that work with him to let me bring the real Squeaky Lobster, and this is the real one, right? If Brent says it's true, it must be true, right, to the event. Now, on Wednesday afternoon, we're having a community social event. Squeaky Lobster turns 21 on Wednesday afternoon. 21 years ago, a developer checked in the registry key that's called Squeaky Lobster. If you want to turn on Exchange's advanced database diagnostics, you set Squeaky Lobster key to 1. That's the squeaky lobster that he was inspired by. And he turns 21 to the literal minute on Wednesday afternoon at 2:15 local time. So, between 2 and 4, Wednesday afternoon, ice cream social, Squeaky's happy birthday. We all sing happy birthday to him. It's a squeaky toy, for heaven's sake, but we're going to do it anyway because it's kind of fun. So please do come along and join us. And I am not responsible for that picture, which ended up going all over the place. So do read the story. It's kind of fun. Sorry?
So flattering.
I was like, really? That was the impression I had. So with that, we hope you've enjoyed the session. Hope you found it informative and maybe a little entertaining as well. Please do fill out the evals. Please do head down to the expo where we will be available, answer all the questions you like, as long as you bring us a beer. That sounds like a plan to me. Thank you.
Thanks.
5:15.